that point to just drain as much clock off as possible because you're up 2 possessions. And Eric, they didn't do anything. Even at the end of the first half, the way they managed that made it seem like they were very happy to go in the locker room at 10-10, and they did not want to let Jimmy Garoppolo screw up any type of momentum because they were getting the ball coming out of the half and they were tied up. I made this point after the Vikings game when we talked about that, where once he threw that interception against Minnesota, they ran the ball 30 out of the next 36 plays. To me, Eric, that just says they don't have a ton of confidence in Jimmy Garoppolo, because if you're having that much success with the run, you are setting that defense up perfectly for play action, some shots over the top, things that are going to make it easy throws for Jimmy G. And they didn't do that. And what happened at the end of the half when your general manager sitting up in the booth, basically making the timeout signal, everybody that's ever picked up a Madden controller is doing the same thing. Like, why is he just letting the clock drain out here with all of his timeouts and a chance to do something? And you saw what happened. Like, they get the play to Wilson. He takes the shot to Kittle. They could have had an opportunity, Eric, to really even change the momentum there. And I know you want to be conservative where they're punting at midfield, but it just seems like if you're going to pay a quarterback nearly $30 million a year, you should have a lot more confidence in Jimmy Garoppolo than they seem to do. Eric, I don't know what your takeaway was, but just watching the way that they let Garoppolo, how they treated him through this playoff run, through the Super Bowl, the way that they had him managing these games, I don't feel like they have a lot of confidence in either him, the weapons around him. I don't know what it is, Eric. I'm not sure that Garoppolo is the guy that's going to get this team over the hump if they're going to have to every year go against guys like Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or even Deshaun Watson, where you're going to have to score points.
Yeah, and I don't know if they get out of the NFC every year after
right,
this.
When you're going against guys like Russell Wilson.
Yeah. So this is a tough loss. Now let's just cut it straight. I mean, this is a tough loss for the 49ers. I think, especially, more than halfway through that game. I mean, actually, looking now at the win probability percentage that I always like to fall back on just because I find it fascinating, with less than 8 minutes to go in the entire game. So we're at the 7.5 minute mark in the fourth quarter. The win probability from ESPN stats and projections was 95.3% for the 49ers. And that just tells you what Mahomes and the Chiefs did over the next 7.5 minutes was absolutely crazy. And it comes down to game planning and comes down to clock management. And then it comes down to what you said, which was the fact that I don't know if I'm totally sold on the idea that Jimmy G is not capable of this, but I think he's a victim of some of the worst play calling that I've ever seen. And that includes clock management, the clock management portion of it. We sit and say that they don't have confidence in him when they run 30 out of 36 plays. And then in this game, they do the exact opposite in the fourth quarter, which is let's not go to the run game. Let's not go to what's worked for us all season long. And let's force Jimmy G to make all of these big plays, which then forces him into some very bad decisions. And we saw that with the interception and the plays that just don't make any sense. And he looks not comfortable in that situation where he's forced to make a certain run, a certain play. And so I just think that this team is going to have to take a very hard look in the mirror after this and say, we did have the talent. I mean, the talent around Jimmy G to me wasn't suspect. You had Sanders. You had these other younger receivers that were coming up.
Deebo had a good game.
Deebo made huge plays in that game. And then Kittle, I mean, everyone knows what I think of him. He's one of the top tight ends in the entire league. So his weapons, and then like you pointed out earlier, which I think is a completely fair point, with Mostert as a weapon, either in the screen or under the flat. I mean, the things that they could do with this team, Mostert, Coleman, a little bit of Breda, then you've got Kittle, you've got Deebo, you've got Sanders. Jimmy G has all the weapons he needs to spread the field out. I just don't think he's comfortable in the positions that his coaching staff is putting him in. Are we going to be a run-first offense? Or are we going to force the pass? I think from week to week, he doesn't know what's expected of him or what's going to be laid on his shoulders as the momentum and game plan shifts even throughout the 4 quarters of a game.
When you watched him in that game, they went into New Orleans, he looked like he had turned a corner. Like he was a quarterback that could go out and win a game for them. But as you watch them make that playoff run, even against the Rams late in the season, He had a couple good drives at the end of that game. Even going up to Seattle, he had some good throws at the end of that game that got them the number 1 seed. But when they got to the playoffs in crunch time, Eric, it's like something changed. Either, like you said, in the play calling or the game planning, or something just felt different with him. And all of a sudden, you have this quarterback on a number 1 seed team, and he's not breaking 10 throwing attempts a game, and the yardage is way off. And yes, they're coming in with this running attack, but the reason I like the Chiefs and ended up betting on them for this game was I felt like they had multiple ways to win. They didn't have to have everything go perfect for them to win. And the more I watched the 49ers, it was like everything has to go perfect for the entire football game for them to win. They have to get a lead early, which they did, and then they have to find a way to hold the Chiefs to field goals and not touchdowns. And they got the deep interception. Everything had gone to script, and then it fell apart and they opened the door. And that was what I was afraid of, was all Mahomes needs is the football, and he can do damage unless he's down way, 4 or 5 possessions in the fourth quarter. And they kept it close enough where you just felt like if they get this ball, he's going to make it happen. Even though the throws were off, if he just hits one throw, if they just get the ball down the field and he gets one big play, the momentum's going to swing, Eric. And that's all it really took in this game. And I agree with you. I've heard a lot of talk and chatter about should Mahomes have been the MVP. I think the comeback and the way it happened, you almost had to give it to Mahomes just because there's always a quarterback bias. But Damian Williams really kept them in this game.
He played well.
He ran the ball. Mm-hmm. He wasn't taking negative runs. He was taking runs that looked like, oh man, there's no room there. Oh, he scorched through for 3 or 4 yards. He kept them in that game early, and then he knocked them out at the end with the big touchdown run there of 38 yards. So I would not have had a problem if Williams won the MVP, because I felt like he was better from the entire game, quarters 1 through 4, where Mahomes, it was really basically inside that 7.5 minutes of the fourth quarters when he took over. So I have no problem there. Now, Eric, all the talk is shifted to Mahomes is going to break the bank. His extension is going to be massive, but we've seen that doesn't always play out for these teams with the highest paid quarterback. You can go back through and look at the history of the Super Bowls over the last decade or so, and you probably have to go back to somewhere between Patriots, Giants, where Eli and Brady were pretty close then. But normally it's the team with the lower paid quarterback that is winning these Super Bowls, because simply your roster can be much deeper. Mahomes is going to break the bank. He's going to set a record for total money, guaranteed money, everything when his extension comes into play. So how much do you feel like that is going to limit the ceiling of what this Chiefs team could do and potentially a run at a dynasty with this extension in play?
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a factor. There's just no doubt about it. But I will argue that Mahomes is the guy that I would pay on this situation. It wouldn't be a Dak. It wouldn't be a Goff. It wouldn't be a Cam Newton. It wouldn't be fill in the blank. But I would say Mahomes is a guy that I would do that with. And I'll tell you why. A couple of reasons. Number one, leadership. He has shown from coming in for Alex Smith to winning an MVP, having an MVP year, and then winning a Super Bowl, all within a short period of time, breaking that Madden cover curse, by the way.
Yeah.
And he hasn't done anything stupid off the field that I'm aware of. That's a guy that you want leading your football team. Now, are you going to have to sacrifice some other things? Yeah, I think you will. I think it's going to come time where you're going to have to do running back by committee, and you might even have to do receiver by committee, because you might be able to pay Hill and you might be able to pay Kelsey. That's still up in the air. I don't know, depending on what those guys long-term are going to be looking at. But you're going to have to make some sacrifices in some other areas. Defensively is where it would scare me for the Chiefs a little bit, because I think that is always each year the area where I think they could stay out of the Super Bowl, not win the Super Bowl. Is you could have this great offense, this great leader at quarterback, and end up losing games simply because the other team scores more points than you do. And that's a defensive problem. But to me, Justin, I think if there's any quarterback in the league where I would, as a GM, say, I'm going to pay you and make that sacrifice to get a couple of, like I said, a running back by committee or a couple of veteran or journeyman receivers, I'd be willing to take that chance for the next 5 to 6 years.
Well, they don't have a choice. He's got him a Super Bowl ring.
Because he's going to make $400 million.
Yeah, because they're just going to open the wallet and pay him whatever. And I think to your point, he is the quarterback in this league that's going to be the next Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, that's going to take wide receivers that you really didn't know weren't huge names when they came out, and he's going to make them superstars. Mm-hmm. Because you can go back through and look at the wide receivers that have come through New England or played with Peyton Manning. These guys that can take names you've never heard of or mediocre type talent and make them superstars because they're that good, they're that talented. And I think that's what the Chiefs are going to beckon on. Look, they did this with Damian Williams at running back, making about $1 million a year. Mm-hmm. They had the corpse of LaShawn McCoy that they weren't even playing throughout the second half of the season. They, at the skill position, I think there's other wide receivers, especially when you look at the coming draft class this year that's so wide receiver deep. The Chiefs are going to be able to get somebody else even down the road to replace Watkins. It seems like he was out on playing in 2020. Now he's back in, but he's got a pretty big number. But I think the wide receiver position, what you're seeing coming out of college, Eric, are guys that come in and ready to play. If you take guys like that can run pretty much the entire route tree and you put them with a guy like Mahomes that can just throw them open, I think they're going to be fine under that. Their biggest issue will be on the defensive side of the football. Can they keep enough talent there? And from a depth standpoint, when they're going to have to pay some of these guys, and when those guys go down, what's going to be behind them? Because I think that's the problem that you see with the Dallas Cowboys.
Sure.
There's just not enough depth on that team because they have such a top-heavy roster. So a guy like Mahomes, Eric, I'm all in for paying. A guy like Dak, I'm out. I'm not paying him. I'm not paying him $35 or $40 million. If I'm Dallas, I trade Dak Prescott.
Okay.
There's so many teams right now that need quarterbacks that if you have any question at this point, if someone is even a top 10 quarterback, I think that you trade him and you bail out. If your goal is to win the Super Bowl, there's no sense in paying a guy $40 million. You can go look at every article out there about the percentage of cap. It goes back to Steve Young and Jerry Rice that long ago, where a team had that much cap money wrapped up in two players that were that successful, and they were around 21% or so. If Dallas gives Dak the money that he wants, based on the other issues that this team has, they'll be lucky to be a wild card team every year, even if they make the playoffs. I don't see the point in that. At least with Mahomes, he's gotten there. You've seen what he can do. He's shown that he is the best quarterback in the NFL. Dak, you can make an argument, might not be top 10. I don't think you pay a guy like that, Eric. I think there's enough quarterbacks that are coming out that you trade Dak, you try to get one or two first, and you go back in and you just try to put a good roster around him and get that 4 or 5 year window where you're not putting all this money in, and you hope you can get in a position like the Chiefs have, just a better roster with maybe not as good of a quarterback. But look, Mahomes wasn't a name that anybody was clamoring. I mean, the Chiefs traded up to get him.
Right.
The Saints were waiting there, but he didn't go in the first pick. He wasn't a slam dunk guy. Most people scratched their head of like Mahomes, but the Chiefs knew what they had. And I feel like there's guys that are out there that could do that versus just destroying your roster and your cap flexibility with this Dak deal, Eric, that the Cowboys are going to go to. So I think it's two different situations for quarterbacks. I'm in on paying Mahomes, but I'm out on paying a guy like Dak.
And we're going to see what's going to happen with the Cowboys if they go ahead and do pay Dak Prescott, because they've already paid Ezekiel Elliott. And we've talked about how we think that's going to hamstring that team. Now, Justin, I've got to ask you real quick here, because one guy we saw rise and just get into the prime part of his season right before the playoffs and then have a huge run was Derrick Henry. And he's come out this week saying, yeah, Ezekiel Elliott money would be the floor for me. So what are your thoughts on that?
Eric, I'm out there too. Look at what the 49ers did, and then go look at the contracts that those guys are under. Mostert has played for like a third of the league.
Yes, right.
And if you have the right situation around him, the right coaching staff, the right offensive line, you don't have to have a $90 million running back. Neither of these teams broke the bank on running backs. That was the other takeaway. When you look at the skill position, these guys weren't like the top paid guys in the league, and they're the teams that are in the Super Bowl. I said it last year in the offseason. I don't pay Zeke Elliott. I don't give him that kind of money. I go into the draft and I find someone. And it's the same way with Derrick Henry. Look, as good as he is, he's not worth $90 million tied up over 6 years or however that contract breaks down. If you're going to give him